triangle of blue. The Juliet Hampton Morgan Library. Before you go up the stairs to the second floor, make sure you go underneath and look straight up. The architect who designed this and built it came into Stonehenge Gallery when I was having a show and saw this image and bought it. And he came over to me and said, "I made that!" And I said, "I am so glad. I can't tell you how amazing it was to see it." We're at the beach. Again, that strong lines and form and shape, and somebody says, "Gosh, that looks like the early surrealist painter Gregorio di Chirico." Thank you. Who I didn't know, and of course I had to then start looking, and who are the surrealists, and it's a whole nother avenue of exploring, and that sort of thing happens again and again and again. It's part of what makes all of this so fabulous. On Jefferson Street, out in front of the Montgomery Independent newspaper, this is the sidewalk right out in front of their store. One summer afternoon. There's light and shadow. Sometimes it's literally a light and shadow. But it can be wine glasses in the sink. It can be something you see at the beach. Reflections playing. It can be something that you're up at the top of another parking garage downtown, and you look down and the light is bouncing off of the windows. And then you're up there and you're taking pictures, and this guy drives into the image, backs his car in and pops the hood, and I'm like, thank you.
Yes, that's right.
And, wrought iron handrails on a set of stairways early in the morning, and the lights playing through it, creating these cinnamon roll shapes. There's color. So if you look, see this little wavy line? You see that screw and this screw? So it was raining. When I lived in New York, I went out for walks every lunch hour. I gobbled down, I had an hour, and then I'd go for 40 minutes. And it was raining. I said, I'm not going out. I said, no, you're going to go out. So I took my umbrella, and I walked up to the end of the street. I'd been working there for 13 years. I'd walked up and down the street that many times. And when I got to the corner, there was a little overhang, and it wasn't raining, so I just stopped there. And I don't know why, but I looked up, and the overhang had a shiny metal attached to it. So I spent the entire lunch hour photographing people walking by, and this is a reflection of this couple that I walked by. With this wonderfully colorful umbrella. And I would have never seen it if I hadn't decided to go out and get wet. But I didn't, because up at the corner, that overhang. Thread bobbs in the window.
I like that.
A restaurant in Atlanta, I don't know what it was across the street, but it was bouncing. It had an open kitchen. It was bouncing on the metal in the back of the kitchen. And I just rushed up there with my camera. I don't care what they think. I took it. Or up in Washington Heights, there's all these little bodega stores, and out on the curb, out on the sidewalk, were all these colorful brooms and dust mops. When you fly through Atlanta, make sure you give yourself plenty of time. Walk, don't get on the train, walk from one terminal to the next. I'm almost sure it's between terminal A and B, they have a permanent display of the rainforest in there. And the ceiling is decorated in rainforest, and and they have one spot where there's an open sky. And then it starts to rain, and you can hear the rain, and there are birds flying through, and the lights are playing on the floor. And this is the escalator, the moving escalator, that those lights are just bouncing, and the lights that illuminate the pathway. And I just happened to look left as we were walking through there, gawking at the ceiling, and I saw that. And this was something that I saw on the sidewalk one day when I came out ready to walk home. It was about 90 degrees, and this was melting on the sidewalk. And I was just fortunate enough to see it. Okay, there were reflections. I have to tell you, reflections are my all-time favorite. When I go shopping, if I'm going with Janice and she wants to go, Janice is the kind of shopper who wants to look and look, and I'm like, here's the list, let's go, and get out. So I say, go, take your time. I'm just going to roam around in the parking lot because this is what's in the parking lot. Endless reflections bouncing off the cars. This wasn't in a parking lot. I was standing at the street corner at First Avenue and 14th, and I turned and looked. This first car was on the curb, and the next two cars were in the street, and they aligned just perfectly, and all of them were in the shade, and the building across the street was sunlit, and it was bouncing on all of them, and they must have all gone to the same car wash on the same day. And I took it. Or I'm walking to work, and I've walked by this place a lot. It's a mannequin shop, and on this particular day, they were just building the display, and so the back of the display, they had stapled a bunch of black paper. And it was a cold, gray day, and so the street was reflecting in the window, and because the back of the display was black, you couldn't see the back of the display, but you could see the mannequin who was in the window, and I just thought, wow, Cruella de Vil isn't dead. She's in this window. So I call this haunt couture. And New York is a great place because all these wonky buildings and the reflection of light, or you open up the drawer, your silver drawer, and you're wearing a blue shirt, and the light bounces on the silverware, and you can't believe that that reflection is going on. And of course, I know where my camera is. I don't have to search for it. And you're walking along, and you see a table on the sidewalk at a restaurant, and the arrangement. So this is a reflection, and it's colored, but it's also an arrangement of those kind of graphic elements, the shapes. And for me, it had everything to do with how all of that fit with the frame. And it's not an intellectual discussion for me. In fact, I studied it, and at first it was, but now it's not. I see it, and it's so ingrained in my psyche that it's intuitive. And then all I have to do is figure out where the framing is. And that involves taking a camera and taking a picture or two. My friend calls it sketching. He says, I sketch with my camera, this is how I do it. I might have to take a step this way or a step that way. I don't want to start rapid fire machine gunning, because then you're not looking, you're just taking pictures and you get home and you hope you got something. He says, I really slow down and I take a couple. But ultimately, he was also the one who said, you can sort of settle into awareness and see something else. But that's how it happens. Or we're at a motel because we're traveling somewhere, and this was on the table, glass table next to the bed. Minor White is a well-known photographer. He's part of the pantheon of, famous photographers. And he said, you should not only photograph things for what they are, but also for what else they are. And I've thought a lot about this one, because at first glance, a photo can inform us. It's something. It's a bench. But at second glance, it can reach us. So that didn't stop me because it was a red bench. It stopped me because I felt a really strong moment of melancholy. Now, other people, once I put that on the wall, it doesn't belong to me. You can interact with it however you want and see it through your sensibilities. So I'm talking about revelation, the type of visual moments that resonate with your sensibilities in some sort of way. And so I'm adding this to my toolbox. And these are some images that for me were strong moments of something that resonated. It wasn't just beach chairs on the beach, but it was the early morning light and the reflection in the water and the arrangement of the clouds, and I don't know, there was just, it was evocative in some way. And this one was very evocative for me. Just poking my face into an abandoned storefront and seeing the light in the back and that little blotch of green on that frosted window. Or a canoe on the eastern lake. A man and his son had just climbed out of it. It was a stormy day. The clouds were just clearing. And they ran out of the photo, and then it was like, wow. Or I'm walking in the park, and in the arrangement of that tree in the front, that is kind of, and then the three trees on the back, there was just sort of this sort of yin-yang, this, what is that? Not a vibration, but, you know, a resonance between the shape of the tree in the front and the trees in the back, and the back are dark, playing against the light snow. I don't know, it was an evocative moment, and I told you about this one. And another moment that I couldn't believe my eyes, a leaf on my windshield. I went out one day after it rained, and I just thought, I just want to roam around and see what happened last night. A storm coming in at the beach.
Wow.
This was like a real evocative moment with the light. Another, I don't know, elegance and grace on the beach. It's just seaweed and sand and the water playing with it, but it provoked something in me. Okay, so all arts, regardless of the medium, can influence and inform and inspire how I see and how I take photos. And as I said, curiosity and openness to exploring. This has taken me to a place where now I'm a conscious student, lifelong student of learning. And I want to just show you real briefly some books that I've read that I think have been really helpful. They're all over on this table. I brought all of these with me so you can look at them. These are photography books that deal with graphic design and composition or the art of seeing. These are drawing books about drawing from observation or landscape painting, or Joseph Albers, who's a very famous painter and dealt with color theory. I've read these. They teach me some things. Brooks Jensen wrote this wonderful book on letting go of the camera. Bales and Orland wrote this fabulous book on art and fear. You have to read this book if you're an artist. Robert Irwin, Seeing is Forgetting, a fabulous painter who became an abstract painter, who finally started working outside of the canvas and finally ditched painting and started doing these constructions where he would knock a wall down in a gallery so you could see the outside and do all kinds of wacky things. But it was fabulous because he's all about, okay, I'm going to forget realism. I just want to see what happens when I start looking. In 2011, I was Googling on Amazon photography and seeing, and I found this book in the upper left-hand corner, The Practice of Contemplative Photography. These 4 books are written by people who are part of what is called the Mixong Institute. And it's kind of Zen Buddhist based. That is their... So I read these books and I thought, wow, these folks work like I do. And it actually, in a very elegant way, put to word how I was practicing. And so it was very useful. I studied with them for 3 years. I went to their workshops. And I've since moved on, but it was very helpful. And it isn't just the visual arts. I've been a part of a poetry email chain since 2005. There are 30 of us. Every day somebody picks a poem and sends it to everybody else. And I've come to really adore poetry where I thought I hated it. And Ted Kuzer and Steve Cowitt wrote 2 wonderful books on how poets write. And it's really useful to see the processes that they go through because it has something to say to us as visual artists. And then reading poetry, again, Ted Kuzer and Jim Harris and a Montgomery-based photographer, Jacqueline and Alice Trimble. Wonderful. So these sorts of things can teach us, and I study all the time, and it really makes getting up in the morning fabulous. And I read the obituary page. I mean, it sounds morbid, but I can't tell you how many artists and interesting people I found on those pages by just every once or twice a week going through and looking and reading, and then I say, well, I didn't know about that artist. And I start reading, and then I Google, and then I'm down a rabbit hole finding more about them. It's
Durban Farms?
not Durban Farms. This is actually in Clanton. Oh, my memory is failing me. Well, anyways, it was in their parking lot. And of course, so I find out what abstract photography is, and then a couple of years later, I'm reading the New Yorker magazine, and there's a book review on a book called 9th Street Women. And it turns out these are abstract painters who were women, and because it was in the 40s and 50s, and the world didn't pay as much attention to what women were doing, they talked about the men, but not so much about the women. Well, these women were kind of explorers in the vanguard. This is Joan Mitchell and a couple of the other women. So I read the review and I loved it, so I went and got the book, and I read the book, which was fabulous. I strongly encourage you to read it. It's on the table, you can take a look at it. And I fell in love with Joan Mitchell's work. So she's an abstract painter, and this is a few of her things. And I actually decided, I spent some time looking, and I was really taken with it all. And I decided to go ahead and buy a book about her. And that's also on the table, and there's wonderful images in that book. And this is how you grow, how you sort of get outside your comfort zone, how you realize, wow, actually I do have an eye for abstract, even if I don't understand it, and I was never somebody who went through art college and had no formal training in it. We're getting close to the end. Should I stop or should we go on?
Keep going.
Okay, maybe another 5 or 10 minutes. I read this book, The Zen of Seeing, by Frederick Frank. He said, let seeing be the celebration of experiencing, of the eye in love, instead of pictures to be framed. Oh, do I love that quote? I mean, I've printed it and it's on my bulletin board at home, and I think about it a lot. It's all about the experience. It's all about what happens at the moment of seeing, and it's less about framing these images and having a show and winning prizes. You never know what's going to happen when you sit down at the kitchen table, which is traditionally a mess. It's a disaster zone. But on this particular day, that mess wasn't so bad. Or you're poking around in the rain when Janice is inside getting some medical care up at UAB, and there's a leaf on the hood of the car and you can't believe it. Or you look over the edge of the 3rd floor at the Museum of Modern Art in Munich, Germany, when you're there on vacation, and the arrangement of the chairs, and everybody's looking at their phones, and 2 seconds later, I took another photo, and they're all looking at me going, or you see something in a car, another hood windshield reflection, or something on the sidewalk, walking in my neighborhood. It just goes on and on and on. So this is the end of it. So be curious, go explore, play, which means get out of your comfort zone. So here's the image that took me down to the parking garage. Did I mention this? Can't remember it. All right. So, no, this was in a discussion beforehand. Sorry, you haven't heard this. When June and Saturn, aligned a year ago in December, Janice and I went down to a parking lot, and upstairs on the top floor, somebody had been up there with a motorcycle leaving burnt tire marks. And I was like, wow, that's great. I'm coming back here. So I did, and this is one of the images I took. It was fabulous. But I also took this image. Oops. And I thought, when I got home and I looked at it, actually when I was there, I looked at it, I thought, it kind of looks a little bit like a landscape. Mm-hmm. I think I could, I'll take the picture and I'll take it home. And I took a few others that day. And then I went home, and when I put it on the computer, I thought, what would happen if I started painting on it in the digital darkroom? And I was like, yeah, I like this. So, since then, I've kept my eye peeled when I'm out walking about for any piece of stone wall or sidewalk or anything that has a crack, a stain, a bleb. This is in the Martin Luther King Legacy Center. It's the only bleb on the wall. Every otherwise it's a pristine wall, and I turned it into that.
Wow.
And there's a building down in the Cottage Hill neighborhood. It's abandoned, and it's got these retaining walls as you go up the steps of the house. And this moss was growing on it, and this is what I turned it into. Or this was in the street right after it rained one day. This is dirt. Some of it's wet, some of it's not. You can see that some of the tar is got a light sheen of sand on it, but the bottom is still wet, and I turned it into that. Yes?
I'm just curious, what program are you working in to add?
Photoshop.
Okay.
Photoshop has paintbrushes, and I load, so because I'm learning a little bit about color, and I'm actually doing some painting, I'm not going to bore you with that, but I'm doing some painting, I'm learning about complementary colors and how colors play with each other. And so when I work with this, I look at it and I say, I wonder what that will look like. And so I start painting. I'm like, no, that's not right. So I eliminate that layer and I put another color. And I just keep painting and I find my way. I don't have any forethought about how that's going to work out. It just happens. This is another concrete wall with some wonky stain. and I turned it into that. Actually, I painted that the same week that that volcano blew up in the South Pacific a couple of weeks ago. And I thought, wow, this is a volcano. Or this, which I lived in northern Minnesota for 6 years, and it is, you want to know cold. Go to northern Minnesota for 6 years. It is freezing cold. And this just resonated with me that this was the Arctic North. I loved the texture here, and I thought there might be something there, and there was. And this was a beam in the ceiling, and when I got home, I stretched it a little bit and cropped it a little bit and painted on it. This was also in the ceiling.
Goodness.
This was on a wall, and it became a waterfall. And this was another waterfall that became even more interesting when I painted on it. And this was another beam in the ceiling, and I loved it. And this was moonlight. And this was either going to be mountain ridges or a wave coming into the ocean, and I couldn't quite figure out what. And every time I look at it, it messes with my head, because first I see the ridge line, and then I see the wave. But I had a chance to, you look at it this way, right at the edge of that white where it comes in, I wanted to make it a wave, so I darkened the sand a little bit, and I created that shadow, because waves, when they come in at the beach, sometimes have that. And then I lightened it more progressively as I moved from the image, and of course the reverse happened when I moved from the edge of the wave back to the top of the image. And I thought, wow, I'm actually learning a few things about painting, or applying them, which is great. I mean, it's so much fun. And this turns into a wave. So I'm going to stop. I go to a movie appreciation class every Tuesday night at the Montgomery Cultural Arts Center at the old Armory building in downtown Montgomery. And John Martello, who's a fabulous, he's a director, an actor, a producer, he does those classes. And this week he said, we're going to look at watch a Japanese movie called Ikiru. It's a Japanese word for I am living, by Akira Kurosawa, who's a famous Japanese director. And last night, I was finished with this, and I thought, I want to go find out a little bit more about this movie. And I find a Roger Ebert review of the movie. And I thought, Roger Ebert, I know who he was. I remember Siskel and Ebert. Didn't he get cancer? Didn't he pass away? So I start looking for Ebert, and I find him on Wikipedia. And indeed, he died in 2013 from cancer. And a couple years before he died, he knew he was dying, and he wrote something that really took my breath away. And I thought, that's how I want to end this class. He said, what I'm grateful for is the gift of intelligence, and for life and love, for wonder and laughter. And all I would add to that is that I'm grateful for the gift of practicing the art of seeing. So that's it.